Well, thanks for joining us today on the Big Blue Podcast. I'm Leigh Goodson, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Greg Stone. I
Hello.
just said co-host, Dr. Greg Stone.
Well, I can be a co-host.
Well, that's another show. But anyway, we're here at the McKeon Center for Creativity at the Metro Campus, and we are excited to be joined today by Professor Susan Kamphaus, Associate Professor of Psychology at TCC's West Campus. There's a lot going on at West.
There is a lot going on at West.
There's a lot going on at West. So, Susan, we're really excited to have you here today.
Thank
you. I'm just personally so excited. You were in the first book club that I had the opportunity to host, and just so enlightening for a brand new president. Let me say thank you on the air for that. That was just good stuff, and all your participation in some things. Talk to us a little bit. You're a really dedicated faculty member. I oftentimes, when you speak up about things, you're equally advocating for. You're just advocating for everything that has to do with the college, students, administration, faculty, all at the same time, and just us really progressing in the right direction for everyone involved. Talk to us a little bit about your teaching philosophy and how you developed that philosophy, and who has influenced you to be the person you are today professionally.
Okay, perfect. Now, can I do the 8-page philosophy of teaching, or would you prefer that I consolidate and squish it down just a little bit?
You could do the 8-page, but then that would be the whole show.
Oh, okay.
And we've got a few other questions.
Okay, so why don't I break it down to maybe 2 big words plus or minus 100 smaller words beyond that. If I had to name my philosophy of teaching or describe it in 2 words, it would be engagement and facilitation. And it's not just engagement and facilitation, it's delivering engagement and facilitation, or selling engagement and facilitation with enthusiasm. So in my classroom, I like to use different types of teaching strategies, active strategies. So group work is one, guided self-learning, and active learning. But it's not just those 3. It's those 3 while promoting critical thinking. Critical thinking is probably the heartbeat of my entire philosophy of teaching. So it's important to me to get my students engaged. I want them to be talking in a group. I want them to be talking across the room to each other. I want them to be an active learner. When I went to school, I had actually quite a bit of active learning. It was not the traditional lecture format. There was a lot of lecture, and it was comforting. Right? You walk in, you know what you're going to get, you have your notebook out, your pen out, the text out, you lecture, you're secure in it, you leave it, you come back to it, you study it, you take the test, and then it's gone, literally forever. But when in the classes, when we were engaged, when we interacted, we might have complained about it a little bit, we might have groaned and moaned about group work, but we walked away from that class with knowledge that we hung on to for a while. What influenced my philosophy of teaching? I wish I could sit here and tell you that I've read countless books on teaching theory, and I've read hundreds of philosophies of teaching. It's based literally on my own experience. So I attended school as a non-traditional student. At 18, I was enrolled in college. I had my roommate, I had my dorm, and at the last minute I told my parents it just wasn't for me. I was too mature for college, and I wanted to live my life, and I could do it. So I did that for some years until I realized, okay, I can make a living without college education. But I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. So I went back to school at 25. I was looking through a different lens than a traditional 18-year-old student. And I had professors who never engaged their students, never learned their students' names, really couldn't be bothered made it very clear that if you needed to talk to the professor, you talk to the grad student. I'm here to teach simply because it's a requirement, but my passion is my research. I also had professors who did engage and who were passionate and who did care and got their students involved. And I always said, if I ever do that, I'm going to do it this way, and I'm not going to do it these ways. So my philosophy of teaching came from my actual experience as a college student.
Well, let's talk about students for a minute, because if I think about students that I've taught, the students I'm teaching this semester in a Comp 1 section, they're in many ways very different than the students that I encountered 10 years ago or 15 years ago or so when I started teaching. And I'm wondering if you've noticed a difference in students and what our students need now that maybe we never noticed they needed before, or maybe they needed it but we just weren't seeing it. I'm just curious about how you feel, if you feel there's been a change or an evolution in some way in the students that we're getting.
And that was Dr. Stone's very kind way of saying I've been doing this for 22 years. So, yeah, I see a huge difference in students today than in the early 2000s or 10 years ago. One thing, today, they're technologically savvy. They are very confident with technology. So when we introduce Blackboard, there's no longer an entire class period dedicated to this is where you click, this is where you read, this is where you click. They go in, they don't want the instruction because they do things differently. And 4 students may approach one particular assignment or technology requirement differently. And it's always the correct way. So I love their confidence in their technology. I see that today. And what else was in that question?
I'm just curious about, what are students' needs that, that you see that students today need that we need to all be paying attention to?
A couple of things. The biggest thing I see is they need some time management skills. Their heart's in the right place. They think they've got it. I'm going to say, I'm guessing 18 out of 25 students in my classroom are working at least a minimum of 30, some 40 hours a week. Most, not all, but most are taking 12 to 16 hours of coursework.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how old is that student on average?
Okay, that's going to be a traditional student, but then you add a non-traditional student in there, and he or she has a family to take care of, and there are duties. And then you add the social aspect into that. So when you start talking to students about, okay, the average formula for how much you study is 2 clock hours for every 1 credit hour you're enrolled in. You're going to spend 6 hours a week in this class in addition to their seat time in the class. But I'm taking 12 hours, okay, so you do the math, there's 36 hours, but I'm working 40 hours a week, but I'm. I have noticed they are interested in any ideas that you have, how to manage time. Most of our our traditional students have taken the first year experience, which is fantastic because that is a big part of that particular class. So they have ideas. But what worked for me? They'll ask me, how did you do all this? How did you get this done? And it's not realistic to tell them to quit working or work fewer hours because these guys are working to pay the bills.
Right.
They're working to pay the bills to come to school.
I think, too, and if they're not working to pay the bills to come to school, so this is just my commentary, the distractions. So today's student up to, in their 30s and are very tech savvy. They've had an iPad in their hand since they were 1. The distractions associated with a smartphone. I've got a couple of teenagers, and certainly, and just being around students that age and college students, it's and I even find it in myself. I go to my phone to check the weather, but then there's a text message on there. So I get into the text message, which leads me to my calendar, which sends me to my email, and I walk away forgetting to check the weather. Because my routine in the morning is check your calendar, check the weather. Where are you going? What are you going to wear? Right. And
Right.
so I think that happens to our students, and how do we help them do that? So that's really interesting, the time management piece that you bring up, because I would absolutely concur. Wow.
And I'd like to say one more thing that I've noticed. They, in terms of their needs, they need just a tiny bit of encouragement to trust what they've learned. And when I see that happen, because they know they've learned, but they don't know that they know. They don't know that they have learned this information. And so if I pull it out of them piece by piece, they're like, oh, I do know that.
I do know that. So
I
it's
did
a confidence.
learn.
So there's
It
some
is.
academic
There's some-
confidence.
yes.
Yeah, that
Yes.
can be worked on.
Yes.
Well, we are here with Professor Susan Kamphaus from the West Campus, Associate Professor of Psychology, here on the Big Blue podcast today. And you alluded to a few things earlier in terms of some things that you use in your classroom, active learning and group work. But I'm wondering if you might be willing to share a couple of your best classroom tricks that other people might very graciously steal from you. What kinds of things work in your classroom?
I wish I had a trick. One of the things first of all, I'm a very passionate person. I love my job. I love what I do. I wanted to do this way before I ever got an opportunity to do this. So I am a lucky one. Enthusiasm, I believe, and I don't have to sit in my office and give myself pep talks before I walk into a classroom. Now got to be up, Susan. You got to, show them that you care. I walk in there excited to be there. I walk in there excited that they are there. Enthusiasm is contagious. So is it a trick? I don't think it's a trick, but I get a lot out of it from them. They give me something back when they see it. Another thing is helping them to make connections, helping them to connect what they're learning to what's happening in the world or what's happening in their everyday life. That makes a difference. I mean, to use a cliche, the light bulb goes off. And when the light bulb goes off, then I puff up my chest and throw up my chin, and I'm excited, and I watch them do the same. And they walk out of the classroom talking about psychology, or I didn't know that, or that surprised me, or, my mother did such and such the other day. So I feel like I've connected. I've made the connection with them.
That's awesome. Tell us, what is one thing you wish every faculty member knew about students that students knew about their faculty member? Does that make sense?
So what every faculty member should know about or would know about their student, and then what students should know about faculty.
Yeah.
Students are there to learn. And I think we take that for granted. Sometimes I think that we walk in, and I'm including myself, we walk in and we're like, oh, here they are again. Do they even know what they're getting into? What's this about? But they are there to learn. They lack confidence. They might be a little fearful. And these things may give the impression to the professor that they don't care or they're not into it, but they are. And they just need a tiny piece, a tiny glint from their professor that says, you're here to learn, I'm here to teach you, we're going to have this great reciprocal relationship, it's going to work, and I'm not scary, and I'm not afraid of you. And I think that helps the students a lot. I had a student, the other thing that's I'm passionate about, is that students realize faculty are there for the student. Faculty are there, so the student should, if the student has a question, Ask the faculty after class. The faculty should stay after class and answer the question, or can meet in his or her office, or can email, or can call, but the faculty member is there for the student. I had a student come in my class, in my office one time, and she literally was trembling. And she's in a shaky voice, she said, I brought my friend here because I was nervous about coming here.
Oh my goodness.
And I'm like, oh no, my door is open. This is what I do. You should always go and visit your professor.
Yeah. I would have, just really quickly, I would have sometimes students come by and the first thing they would say is, I'm sorry to bother you. And I would always stop them and say, no,
Right.
You don't apologize to me for coming. This is why we're here.
And this is what I do.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
This is what I do.
Well, this has been a really good discussion, Susan, about just teaching and learning, which is what we're all about. But we do want to ask you the one question that
Oh my
we
gosh,
ask everybody.
big question. I
You're
know.
big
prepared.
question.
We know you're prepared.
Which is, if you could go back in time and give your 18-year-old self some advice, what would that be?
I'd kick my 18-year-old self in the rear, and first, but if I could do it again, it would be, don't be so afraid. I was terrified. I didn't think I was going to be able to make it in college. So working in the world of work was easier
Safe.
and safer than going to school. And I'll never forget my very first semester. And this was, of course, back in the olden days, and they posted grades on the doors of the classroom with your social security number.
Oh, funny.
And yes, and so I went to school and I walked from classroom to classroom, and I remember going to my biology for majors class, and I found my social security number and I moved across the way and it said A. And I thought, oh, I must have gotten off. I'm so nervous. And so I looked back, found my social security number. 4 times I did this. And I thought, okay, I'm not doing this right. So I got a piece of paper out and I lined it up.
Like a ruler.
And it said A. And I made that semester 4 A's and a B. And I was much more confident to go into the second semester. But it was one more semester after that I stopped waiting for someone to tap me on the back and say, you know what, we made a mistake that time around. So I don't regret working. I wish I would have started school maybe 3 or 4 years earlier. So
Nice. Well, this has been a great discussion. Thank you, Susan Kamphaus.
you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to the Big Blue Podcast. We want to thank our guest, Associate Professor Susan Kamphaus from TCC's West Campus, for spending some time with us today. And we want to thank you for listening. Remember, you can catch the Big Blue Podcast each week in the week at TCC and on the Creativity channel at YouTube. We'll listen to you next time.
See you later.
Thank you.
Bye.